Last time we saw how land plants create structurally complex terrestrial habitats and moist leaf litter to support terrestrial animals. Plants also provide a food supply of plant tissues, including leaves, spores, seeds, nectar, and fruit. However, as we shall see, land plants do not initially supply much vegetation to the very first land animals. It turns out that plants are harder to eat than you might think. The first land animals were almost certainly freshwater animals that just moved their homes into the wet understory of the forest. These aquatic animals include those living in interstitial water in soils, such as protozoans, nematodes, and ostracods. Other strategies also worked. For instance, there were cryptic animals that live in areas of high humidity, such as leaf litter and soils, things like worms, slugs, and flatworms. Still another approach was to be desiccation resistant, by being able to dry out and then rehydrate under favorable conditions, as we see in mites, for example, and also the eggs of shrimp. Becoming fully terrestrial turns out to have similar issues for animals as for land plants. The issues include evolving some kind of water-retaining cuticles, circulatory systems, and some kind of lung, all things accomplished by tetrapods, insects, spiders, and some snails. Now, molecular dates tend to place stem group terrestrial spiders, scorpions, and millipedes in the Ediacaran or Cambrian, about 550 to 475 million years ago. These dates are similar to the young end of land plant molecular divergence dates, but are younger than the best fit molecular clock dates for land plants, which suggest their origination about 635 million years ago. The very early fossil record is predictably bad, but there are trace fossils of arthropods by Cambrian or Ordovician time in dune sandstones that are possibly as old as 500 million years. There are also upper Ordovician trace fossils of backfilled burrows in soils that are suggestive of millipedes. Note that the fossil record of trace fossils is our very first record of terrestrial animals, perhaps reflecting the decent preservation state of trace fossils relative to body fossils. The first body fossil record is of millipedes and scorpions in the Silurian, about 438 million years ago, and of spiders in Devonian rocks in New York State from 410 million years ago. Now, notably, spiders are just spectacularly preserved in the Rhynie chert in Scotland. As I mentioned earlier, the Rhynie chert preserves an unusually complete snapshot of a geothermal ecosystem, including the relative abundances of animals and plants. A very striking feature of the Rhynie arthropods is the complete absence of herbivores in this system. Instead, the community consists of predators like spiders, scorpions, and centipedes, and detritivores that eat decaying vegetation, such as millipedes and springtails. Now, as an aside, I have a sort of pet springtail, popularly known as a silverfish, that lives underneath our espresso maker. The silverfish does very well off of spare coffee grounds, but does not seem to be particularly jittery, despite all the caffeine. Now, the dominance of predators in arthropod communities continues into the Carboniferous before the appearance of abundant herbivorous arthropods. The first evidence of herbivory is consumption of spores in 400 million year old turf plants. This makes sense as a way to eat plants because the plant has packed energy into those reproductive cells, making them a particularly choice target for a hungry arthropod. Plant stems, on the other hand, are problematic, since most plant tissues are compartmentalized into lignin and cellulose boxes. To get the good stuff, arthropods have to eat a lot of unnutritious material, which takes a lot of work. As a consequence of these barriers to getting nutrition from plant tissues, true herbivory, where arthropods are eating the plant structural tissues, does not turn up until 325 million years ago. So, since arthropods first come out on land, say 500 million years ago, but then did not evolve herbivory until 325 million years ago, a grand total of 175 million years has passed with ecosystems constructed completely of detritivores and predators. The base of the classic trophic pyramid, supported by herbivores, was missing for a long time. How does this work? Now here, the detritivores are clever, since rather than try to digest a lot of shoebox-like cells of plant leaves and stems, they wait for the plant to die and start to be rotted by bacteria. The detritivore then eats the fungi, the bacteria, and the liquid, the pre-digested plant goo, rather than the living plants. So although there are no herbivores in this ecosystem, plants are still at the base of the ecosystem, only the herbivore trophic step has been skipped, and the predators go directly after the detritivores and probably each other too. By the early Carboniferous, say 333 million years ago, there were carnivorous insects such as meganeurid dragonflies as flying predators that have wings up to 25 inches long, like that. Other predators in the Carboniferous coal forests included spiders, such as sit-and-wait trapdoor spiders, and large roving spiders up to 40 centimeters long. That's a leg length, something like yay. These spiders were after detritivore insects such as giant millipedes up to 2 meters long. So the Carboniferous was a land of giants in the arthropod world. Now, the large size of these dragonflies and other arthropods has been used to argue that oxygen levels must have been higher in the Carboniferous than today to support such large flying insects. However, there are two problems. First, the body weight of the meganeurids was actually less than that of some living insects. Second, gigantism occurs today in places where there are no rivals, such as competing flying or terrestrial vertebrates. For example, there are hand-sized crickets, like the size of my hand, called the wettas in New Zealand, where there are no native terrestrial mammals as competitors. So large millipedes, spiders, and dragonflies may not indicate high atmospheric oxygen after all. Now, by the time the Mesozoic starts, a major insect radiation is underway. We see this in the Triassic, where insects evolve about a third of all the modern groups of insect mouthparts, reflecting the evolution of strategies for dealing with the relatively low food value of plants. The insect radiation partly reflects a major diversification of insects associated with the gymnosperms, the coniferous plants, and later, between 230 and about 140 million years ago, the angiosperms. Now, it's not completely all plant-associated. For instance, blood feeding turns up about 200 million years ago, associated with the dinosaurs. So to recap, the trophic relationships of the first terrestrial ecosystems were probably much different than today. For about 150 to 175 million years, terrestrial ecosystems consisted of the extreme ends of the trophic pyramid, namely detritivores and predators, but nothing in between. The predators turn up early, perhaps following the cryptic biota of worms, nematodes, and soil animals onto land, but they also ate each other and the detritivores. Some of these arthropods, like the springtails, evolved elaborate predator detection systems to give themselves warning of impending attack, such as very long arrays of tail rods to ward off attack from the rear. The detritivores followed plants onto land, where they found it easier to eat decaying vegetation than the live ones. First, the plants were left to themselves, but predation on plant spores was the first attempt to use plant tissues. Only later, by 325 million years ago, do arthropods start to eat plant tissues directly and also sap. Arthropods also evolve wings to reach the canopy, probably to go after the spores and seeds of plants and to attack climbing and flying herbivorous insects in the tree tops.